Dad, just sign this. It's a routine power of attorney. You'll be under anesthesia for hours. I'll handle the business in the meantime. Those were the last words I heard before the anesthesiologist's mask covered my face. When I woke up, my $6 million company, the one I'd built with 40 years of sweat and sanity, was no longer mine. My own son had transferred every share to his name while I was unconscious. The heart monitor beeped steadily beside me, each tone a metronome for disbelief. If betrayal had a sound, it wasn't screaming. It was that quiet mechanical beep that told you you'd survived the surgery, but not the person you trusted most. My name is Robert Whitmore, 72 years old. Founder and former CEO of Whitmore Automation, a San Francisco-based company that revolutionized smart manufacturing across the West Coast. I started with one prototype in a garage in 1984 and turned it into an empire worth millions. At my age, I should have been enjoying long lunches, charity galas, and peaceful rounds of golf at Pacific Heights. Instead, I was staring at an empty hospital room, wondering how the son I raised on integrity learned to forge my signature. The room smelled like antiseptic and betrayal. The nurse said I was lucky, triple bypass successful. But she didn't know that another kind of heart had failed completely. Andrew had been my pride. I'd paid for Stanford, bought him his first Tesla, and made him COO of the company when he was barely 30. Legacy, I'd called it. He called it leverage. On the table beside me sat a vase of white roses with a small card. Get well soon, Dad. I'll take care of everything. Andrew, everything. 2 days later, I would learn that everything included my company, my accounts, and even the title deed to my penthouse. That morning, I reached for my phone. The hospital had returned my personal items in a clear plastic bag, watch, wallet, and iPhone. Dozens of missed notifications, none from my son. But one email caught my attention. Subject line, change of corporate ownership, effective immediately. It was a legal notification from the state. I read the words twice before they sank in. Effective April 14th, 2025. 100% ownership of Whitmore Automation transferred to Andrew Whitmore. Attached was a scanned signature. My signature. I stared at it numb. It looked perfect, every loop, every slant. Except I'd been under anesthesia at that exact time. The IV tugged at my arm as I sat up, dizziness flooding my chest. I pressed the nurse call button, but what could she do? This wasn't a medical emergency, it was a moral one. I remember whispering out loud. He didn't even wait for me to wake up. The nurse peeked in, adjusting my monitor, oblivious to the war starting inside me. Outside the window, I could see the skyline of San Francisco towers I'd helped wire, factories my machines had modernized. It used to make me proud. Now it looked like a kingdom I no longer belonged to. A few hours later, a courier arrived, a sleek man in a suit, holding an envelope. From Mr. Andrew Whitmore, he said, leaving it on the tray beside my lunch. Inside was a single-page letter. Dad, don't stress about paperwork. Focus on recovery. The company needs strong leadership. I'm stepping in until you're fully well. Love, Andrew. It didn't say temporarily. It didn't say we'll review it later. It said I'm stepping in. Period. That's when the monitors beeped faster. My blood pressure spiked so high the nurse rushed in again. Mr. Whitmore, please relax, relax. The word tasted like poison. She didn't know that while she was calming my heart, my son had already stolen it. I turned my face toward the window, the sun spilling across my hospital bed, like it was trying to apologize for the world. I'd survived open-heart surgery, but now I had to survive open betrayal. If you've ever had someone you love, use your weakness as their opportunity, you understand this kind of pain. It's silent, sharp, and unforgettable. Before we continue, take a second to tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because stories like this don't just happen in San Francisco. They happen everywhere. The morning light cut through the blinds like thin knives, harsh, bright, and far too honest. I'd barely slept. Every heartbeat felt like a reminder that I was alive, but my life as I knew it was gone. At 7:12 a.m., the door opened, and a woman in a charcoal suit stepped in. Not a nurse, not hospital staff. Janet Holmes, my CFO. We'd built the company together. I hadn't seen her since before surgery. Her eyes told me everything before she spoke. "Robert," she whispered, closing the door behind her. "You need to see this." She handed me a tablet. On the screen, Whitmore Automation appoints new CEO. Andrew Whitmore takes the helm following his father's health decline. The photo beneath the headline showed Andrew at the press conference wearing my navy suit, my cufflinks, my smile. The caption read, "Continuing his father's vision with youthful leadership and innovative drive." I could almost hear the lies dripping off every word. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the ventilator. She told them I was dying. Janet nodded, jaw tight. "He told the board you'd suffered mild cognitive damage from anesthesia, that you wanted him to take over immediately to stabilize investor confidence." The words didn't even make sense. I'd been unconscious, not senile. But in the corporate world, perception outruns truth. She set another folder on the bed. Inside were legal copies, the forged, durable power of attorney. My signature again, perfect down to the last flourish. "He filed this while you were in surgery, Robert. The notary is fake. The witness line is blank." I sank back into the pillow. The room felt smaller, air heavier. I'd wired thousands of machines to obey logic, but I couldn't make my own son obey conscience. "Can we fight it?" I asked. Janet hesitated. "Legally, yes. But Andrew's already moved assets. He froze your personal accounts. You're technically on medical leave. They won't let you access corporate funds." She looked at me the way a doctor looks before telling you it's terminal. "He planned this, Robert. Every detail." I closed my eyes. The world tilted. So this was how legacy dies, not with a scandal, but with a signature you didn't write. Outside the door, I could hear a nurse's cheerful voice, a patient laughing down the hall. Normal life went on indifferent to mine collapsing. When I opened my eyes again, Janet was still there, tears in her own. "I'm sorry," she said. "I tried to stop him, but the lawyers believed him. Everyone thought you wanted it." I forced a bitter smile. "Everyone always believes the healthy man over the sick one." She squeezed my hand. "Don't give up. You're not finished yet." When she left, the silence rushed back in, louder than before. The flowers from Andrew had already wilted. I threw them into the trash. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped and hummed, measuring the life of a man who'd lost everything that made him live. At dusk, a hospital chaplain knocked softly on my door. Mr. Whitmore, would you like prayer this evening? I hadn't prayed since my wife Clara died 12 years ago. I'd spent those years believing that hard work replaced faith that precision and numbers could protect you from chaos. But chaos had found me anyway. I nodded slowly. Yes, maybe just this once. He sat beside me, hands folded. Would you like to lead? I hesitated, words catching in my throat. Then quietly I whispered, Lord, if I wake up tomorrow, don't let me die ashamed. Give me enough time to make things right. The chaplain said, Amen. The room felt a little less cold. That night I stared at the ceiling tiles until the lights dimmed. Somewhere inside me, a spark, faint but stubborn, refused to die. They could take my company, my penthouse, my accounts, but they couldn't take my mind. They couldn't take the years of knowledge stored in my hands. And in that sterile silence, I made myself a promise. If I ever walked out of this hospital, I'd make sure Andrew learned what real inheritance looks like. Not money, not shares, but consequences. I pressed the nurse call button one last time. When she appeared, I told her calmly I'd like to be discharged tomorrow. My family's handling things. She smiled. That's good news, Mr. Whitmore. You must be proud. Proud. The word stung like salt. But I smiled anyway. Yes, I said softly. Very proud. The nurse thought I was going home to my son. In truth, I was going to war. By 10 a.m., my discharge papers were signed. The hospital wheelchair creaked as it rolled me toward the entrance, a flimsy plastic bag of belongings hanging from the handles, my wallet, my watch, my ruined trust. Outside, the wind off the bay smelled like salt and second chances. A black sedan idled by the curb engine, humming softly. The driver stepped out, a tall man in his 60s, with a face that carried too many secrets to count. Martin Crane. My lawyer. My oldest friend. The one man I'd called the night before from the hospital payphone. He'd answered on the first ring. Still breathing, he'd said. Barely I'd told him. But ready. Martin opened the door for me now, his voice low. No one followed you, only regret, I said. We didn't head toward San Francisco. We drove east toward Lake Tahoe, 200 miles of silence broken only by the soft rattle of pill bottles in my coat pocket. Halfway there, Martin spoke. I reviewed the documents Janet sent me. Your son's not stupid, he's vicious. He set up shell companies in Nevada to reroute assets. Can we get it back, I asked. He gave a humorless chuckle. Legally, eventually. Strategically, absolutely. But we'll need to be ghosts for a while. That night, we checked into a wood cabin near Incline Village, disguised under an alias Mr. Robert Wills. The walls smelled like cedar and dust. Martin set his leather briefcase on the table, flipping it open to reveal a laptop, old court files, and a half-empty bottle of bourbon. You're off the grid now, he said. Your son froze every personal account under your name, but he doesn't know about the offshore one you set up back in 2009, Cayman Trust, remember? I blinked. I hadn't thought about that account in years. My late wife, Clara, had convinced me to open it for emergencies, she'd said. I guess this qualified. Martin slid over a folder. Inside were transfer logs, board meeting minutes, and screenshots Janet had secretly provided from inside the company's system. Every move Andrew made was documented. Every lie time-stamped. Looks like he transferred the company shares to a shell entity under AW Holdings, Martin said. He's trying to sell minority stakes to private equity funds. We have maybe 6 weeks before it's irreversible. I leaned back the chair, creaking under my weight. 6 weeks to reclaim a lifetime. That night, I stared into the fireplace, watching the flames devour the edge of a log inch by inch, slow, relentless, inevitable. It reminded me of how greed eats a man from the inside out. On the cabin's small table lay my old leather notebook. I opened it to a blank page and wrote the first entry in what would become my war journal. Day 1. Betrayal acknowledged. Weakness catalogued. Counterattack pending. I paused, listening to the wind pushing through the pines outside. For the first time since surgery, I felt something steady inside me, not peace but purpose. The next morning, I shaved in front of a cracked mirror, the cold water biting at the stitches on my chest. The reflection staring back at me looked older than 72, but sharper than ever. I wasn't a dying man anymore. I was a man reborn by fury and focus. Martin had already set up a temporary workspace in the cabin, 2 laptops, an encrypted phone, and a whiteboard covered in arrows and names. At the center of it all, Andrew Whitmore written in red marker. First, we rebuild your network quietly, Martin said. You still have contacts in Singapore and Frankfurt, investors who owe you favors. We'll use shell companies to buy back small equity blocks. He won't notice until it's too late. He poured coffee into tin mugs, and second, he added his tone, turning colder. We hit him, where it hurts most. Public image. That afternoon, I logged into my laptop for the first time in months. Janet had sent me digital access to the company's camera feeds before she was forced to resign. I clicked through each one: the corporate lobby, the design lab, the executive floor, and there he was, Andrew. Sitting at my desk, drinking from my mug, surrounded by people who used to call me sir. On the wall behind him hung the company slogan I'd written decades ago. Innovation is built on integrity. He didn't even flinch at the irony. I hit record on my screen capture software. Every arrogant gesture, every careless smirk saved to a folder labeled Evidence, Son. That night, I couldn't sleep. The stitches on my chest throbbed with every heartbeat. But beneath the pain was something else, a rhythm I recognized. The rhythm of work. I opened my notebook again. Day 2, he took my name. I'll take back everything it ever stood for. I closed it, letting the fire's glow wash over the room. Outside, the snow began to fall slow and steady. For the first time in weeks, the world looked clean again. By the end of that first week in Tahoe, the snow had stopped, but the silence had teeth. Every morning I'd wake to the sound of the lake wind scraping against the cabin roof and ask myself the same question. How does a father fight his own blood without losing his soul? Martin had the legal side handled documents, filings, shareholder traces, but I knew something he didn't. Andrew didn't just want my company. He wanted my story, the public image of the noble founder handing over the torch to his brilliant son. So that's what I would destroy first. One evening, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank document. A few words at the top: Elder Betrayal in the Age of Innovation. Author R.W. Verity. It wasn't revenge I was writing. It was truth. I typed until dawn. about how sons inherit power they never earned, about how signatures can be stolen faster than respect can be rebuilt. I included no names, no specific company details, only patterns the kind that readers could recognize in their own lives. By sunrise, 6 pages sat on my screen, equal parts, confession and indictment. I sent it to one place only, the Wall Street Journal. Subject line for consideration: anonymous submission. Then I closed the laptop, made coffee, and waited. 3 days later, Martin burst into the cabin holding his phone. "Robert, you've gone viral." What? He handed it over. The headline glowed in black and white: RW Verity, when family turns the boardroom into a battleground. The byline said anonymous contributor, but anyone who knew me could read between the lines. Within hours, the comments section exploded. This broke my heart. My father went through the same. Why are we treating our elders like obstacles instead of origins? TV pundits started quoting it. A podcast host called it the most haunting business essay of the decade. I didn't feel proud. I felt seen. The next step came faster than I expected. Martin's email notifications were buzzing non-stop: investors, lawyers, and journalists trying to figure out who RW Verity was. Meanwhile, Janet texted from a new number. "You lit a fire in Silicon Valley." He's panicking. Board wants answers. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Martin looked up from his notes. "You've drawn blood, old man. Now let's make sure he bleeds in the right direction." That night, he outlined our next move. "Your crypto fund from 2009 Cayman Trust still holds significant reserves. We'll use that to buy back shares quietly through third-party accounts. We already have one in Singapore ready to move." I blinked, surprised. "You think we can outsmart him financially?" Martin's grin was sharp. "You didn't just build machines, Robert. You built systems. Systems can be reclaimed." He slid over the first transfer authorization for me to sign. For the first time since surgery, my signature meant something again. Days blurred into nights. The fire crackled, the snow melted, and my small cabin became the nerve center of a quiet revolution. Each transaction pulled another piece of my empire back under my control. Andrew's name still decorated the headlines, but his grip was slipping, and every time fatigue set in, I'd look at the cross necklace Clara had left me before she passed. It hung from the lamp by the window, glinting softly in the early light. I whispered. "I once thought faith was trusting people. Now I know it's trusting that truth has perfect timing." I wasn't waiting for divine rescue anymore. I was becoming the answer to my own prayer. 2 weeks later, the Journal contacted me again. They wanted a follow-up essay. Martin advised against it. "Too risky," he said. "They'll figure out it's you." But I couldn't stop now. People needed to see what greed looks like when it hides behind family dinners and inheritance speeches. So I wrote again, this time not as a victim, but as a warning. A man who'd learned that love without boundaries turns into servitude. By the time I hit send, I wasn't trembling anymore. I was steady. The snow outside the cabin had begun to thaw, leaving streaks of silver water running toward the lake. I stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the thin mountain air. Each exhale carried a little more of the weight I'd been holding. Somewhere in San Francisco, my son was watching his empire shake. And somewhere above us, both I believed Clara was watching too, smiling, maybe even proud. If you're still following my story, type 1 in the comments to let me know you're still here. Because what comes next is where faith meets fury. 3 months after that first article, my pseudonym had become a ghost haunting Silicon Valley. Every major outlet wanted to know who R.W. Verity was. CNN called the essay a scalpel to the soul of modern family business. Executives debated it on talk shows. Investors quoted it at board meetings. Even my own company used lines from it in presentations, without realizing it had been written by the man they stole from. I watched it all unfold from the cabin, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. Janet's texts came faster now. He's unraveling Robert. Investors want answers. Andrew's sweating through every interview. It was time. Martin, I said one morning, set up the next stage. He didn't need to ask what I meant. He just nodded, the corners of his mouth tightening into a smile that had seen too many battles. Then we let the world meet R.W. Verity. A week later, an invitation arrived from a tech ethics conference in Palo Alto. Theme: Legacy, Leadership, and Integrity in the Age of Automation. They wanted the mysterious Verity to give the keynote. Perfect. The day of the event, I dressed the way I always had. When I built my Empire black suit, gray tie, silver cufflinks, engraved with my initials. Not his. Mine. Backstage, the organizer greeted me nervously. "Mr. Verity, we're honored. You've shaken an entire industry." "I only told the truth," I said. But in my mind, I was already counting every lie that had brought me here. The lights dimmed. The moderator's voice echoed through the auditorium. "Please welcome R.W. Verity." Applause erupted as I walked on stage. Every camera in the room turned toward me, expecting some anonymous columnist, not the man who had built half the machines running their world. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began. "For 40 years, I believed legacy was something you left to your children. I was wrong. Legacy is something you build inside them. If they let you." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Recognition flickered on faces: board members, investors, engineers who had worked for me for decades. I continued, voice steady. "3 months ago, I wrote about what happens when family replaces gratitude with greed. What happens when trust is traded for control. That wasn't theory. That was my life." A gasp rolled across the auditorium. I removed my glasses and looked directly into the cameras. "My name," I said, "is Robert Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Automation. And the story you all shared, quoted, and debated was about my son." The silence that followed was total, sharp enough to cut glass. I clicked a remote, and the screen behind me came alive. Slide after slide, forged documents, emails, notarized fakes, financial transfers. Everything Janet and Martin had collected. Each timestamp matched the day of my surgery. While I was under anesthesia, my son used a forged document to steal everything I built. He told the world I was incapacitated. He wasn't wrong, just premature. A few reporters stood filming with their phones. The moderators froze. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." I kept going. I could have hidden this. I could have handled it privately. But silence protects the guilty and punishes the good. If my story helps one man or woman recognize the signs of financial abuse by their own family, then it's worth every headline. The applause started hesitantly, then built until it filled the hall like thunder. For the first time in months, my hands stopped trembling. Outside the conference center, the sun was blinding. Reporters swarmed me the moment I stepped onto the steps. "Mr. Whitmore, will you press charges? What's your message to your son?" I stopped letting the cameras circle. "I don't need a courtroom to prove who I am," I said. "He already knows what he did, and that knowledge will sentence him every day of his life." Then I walked away. That night, back at the cabin, Martin poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed me one. "To exposure," he said. "To truth," I replied. I opened my laptop again, scrolling through hundreds of messages, support from employees, partners, even strangers. But one caught my eye, a single-line email from Janet. "You did it. The board meets tomorrow. Be ready." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. Tomorrow I'd face my son one last time. And this time I wouldn't need to hide behind a pseudonym or a prayer. That night the cabin was quieter than ever. No emails, no reporters, no strategy sessions. Just the soft groan of timber settling in the cold. The fire had burned down to embers glowing like tiny heartbeats beneath the ash. I sat there alone, still wearing the same suit I'd worn to the conference. The applause from that auditorium still echoed faintly in my head, like a memory I wasn't sure I'd earned. Exposing my son had felt necessary. But necessary isn't the same as easy. On the table beside me sat an old silver frame, Clara's photograph. Her smile caught the firelight, soft and unguarded, the way she'd always looked at me after long workdays. I reached out, touching the edge of the frame with trembling fingers. "You were right," I whispered. "Money doesn't change people. It just shows who they already were." I poured myself a small drink and stared at the snow drifting beyond the window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anger, only exhaustion. All those years I'd spent building an empire for my family, believing that legacy meant leaving them something permanent. But permanence, I was learning, was an illusion. What mattered wasn't what I left behind. It was what I refused to let die. I picked up Clara's cross pendant from the table lamp where it hung. The silver was warm from the fire's heat. It had been hers for 40 years, worn down smooth at the edges. She'd told me once, faith doesn't mean waiting for miracles. It means believing you're still worth saving. I hadn't understood that then. I did now. I closed my eyes and prayed, not for revenge, not for wealth, but for clarity. Lord, give me strength to finish what I started, and grace to do it right. When I opened my eyes again, my phone vibrated. A new message from Janet: board meeting tomorrow. 9 a.m., they'll vote on reinstatement. You need to be there in person. Attached was a PDF of the agenda. At the top item,
Review of CEO transition and shareholder authority.
It was time. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The lake was frozen over the horizon, streaked with pale gold. I dressed carefully, navy suit, polished shoes, and the same tie I'd worn the day I founded Whitmore Automation. The stitches on my chest pulled slightly as I tightened the knot, but I didn't care. Pain was a small price for presence. Martin arrived at 6:30 carrying his briefcase and that familiar look of cautious admiration. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "Ready," I smiled faintly. "I've been ready since the day he called me obsolete." We drove back toward San Francisco in silence. Highway 50 unfolded through the snow-covered pines, morning light flickering like a film reel across the windshield. For the first time in a long while, the road didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a return. By the time we reached the city, traffic had begun to swell. Martin handed me a folder with the reinstatement motion, signed by 3 key board members Janet had quietly convinced to support me. "You've got the votes," he said. "All you have to do is show up." I looked out the window at the skyline glass towers reflecting sunlight like polished armor. I'd helped wire those buildings decades ago, back when I believed technology was humanity's next great hope. Now I realized machines don't betray you. People do. Still, I wasn't walking in there as a victim. I was walking in as a builder, reclaiming his blueprint. That night, before trying to sleep, I opened my notebook, the same one I'd started in Tahoe. Tomorrow I face him. My son, my successor, my failure, my test. If he asks for forgiveness, I'll listen. But I won't forget. Faith isn't blindness. It's balanced justice with mercy. I placed the notebook beside Clara's photograph and whispered, "Wish me luck, love." The candle flame flickered as if in answer. The next morning, I left the cabin door unlocked behind me. Not because I'd forgotten, because I knew I wouldn't need to come back. The car's engine rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the gray. Martin merged into the highway, the city waiting ahead. For the first time since the hospital, I felt no fear, no guilt, just purpose, clean, sharp, unstoppable. Whatever awaited me in that boardroom, forgiveness or fire, I was ready to face it. Because I had faith again. Not in family, not in fortune, but in truth. The marble floors of Whitmore Automation gleamed like ice beneath my shoes. 12 months earlier, I'd walked these same halls with pride, the founder, the patriarch, the man whose name was carved on the brass plaque by the elevator. Now security guards watched me as if I were an intruder. Martin walked beside me, calm, unreadable. He handed me the board folder, whispered, "Smile for the cameras." Because there were cameras. CNBC, Bloomberg, and at least 3 local outlets were already setting up outside the glass doors. The media had caught the scent of blood, a corporate parricide finally facing its reckoning. I adjusted my tie, feeling Clara's cross pendant cold against my skin, tucked under my shirt. "Ready?" Martin asked. I nodded. "I built this place from nothing," I said quietly. "Let's remind them who taught gravity to obey." The boardroom hadn't changed. Long mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, a panoramic view of the San Francisco skyline. At the head sat my son, Andrew Whitmore. Perfect hair, perfect suit, perfectly hollow eyes. He looked like a man who'd spent too long pretending he was God and just realized he might not be. "Dad," he said as I entered, voice strained between arrogance and fear. "You didn't expect me to survive," I interrupted. My tone was even calm, almost surgical. "Don't worry, son. I'm full of surprises." Janet sat halfway down the table, her gaze flicking between us. The other board members avoided eye contact, their hands folded around coffee cups, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitmore, this is an unscheduled appearance." "We were under the impression you were dead," I asked. "Incapacitated, senile, choose whichever rumor my son circulated this week." A few chuckles rippled nervously through the room. I placed a thick binder on the table. Inside the forged documents, the emails, the transfers, the timestamps from my hospital stay. Everything. Martin turned on a projector. Behind us, the evidence flashed onto the wall like a trial by fire. On April 14th, I began while I was under anesthesia. A forged power of attorney was filed with the state. Within 48 hours, $6.2 million in company shares were transferred to an entity under my son's control. The notary listed doesn't exist. The signature created by software I designed 20 years ago. A gasp from one of the directors. Another whispered, "My God." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Dad, that's not fair. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You used what I built to destroy me. That's the problem with giving children tools before they've earned them. They mistake craftsmanship for ownership." Martin stepped forward, handing the chairman a sealed envelope. "Inside you'll find notarized statements from the real witnesses. Mr. Whitmore's physician, the hospital timestamp logs, proof that he was unconscious during every transaction." The chairman opened the envelope, eyes widening as he read. He looked at Andrew. "Is this true?" Andrew's composure cracked. "Dad, I was trying to protect the company. You were in surgery, investors were panicking. Protect it from what I asked. Integrity." He looked at me, then the same boy who once built cardboard robots in my garage begging me to watch. Now he looked smaller than he ever had as a child. Janet broke the silence. "I move that the board reinstate Robert Whitmore as CEO Emeritus effective immediately and terminate Andrew Whitmore's authority pending investigation." One by one, hands went up. Every single one unanimous? Andrew's face went pale. "Dad, please. We can fix this. I can fix this." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You can't fix character, son. You either have it or you don't." Martin leaned toward the cameras stationed just outside the glass wall. "Gentlemen, I think the public deserves a statement." I straightened my tie, faced the reporters as the doors opened. Flashes popped like gunfire. I spoke slowly, clearly, letting every word carry the weight of justice earned. Today isn't about money. It's about accountability. My name was stolen, but not my dignity. Let this serve as a reminder you can inherit assets, but not integrity. The applause came not from the room, but from the hallway employees who had gathered silently listening. Some were crying. Others stood straighter, proud. As I left the boardroom, Andrew called after me, voice breaking. "Dad, I never meant for it to go this far." I didn't turn around. "You never meant for me to wake up," I said. But I did. Outside, the winter light hit the glass towers just right, cold, brilliant, merciless. And for the first time in a year, I saw my reflection not as a victim, but as a man restored. 48 hours after the vote, my name was back where it belonged, above the main entrance of Whitmore Automation. The gold letters gleamed against the morning fog like a resurrection. I stood across the street, watching maintenance workers reattach the final W, my reflection shimmering in the glass. For decades, that building had represented progress, innovation, the future. Now it represented something rarer, redemption. Martin joined me on the sidewalk, coffee in hand. Congratulations, Robert. Official word from the state just came in. All transfers reversed. All assets returned. I nodded slowly. And him, he sighed. The board froze Andrew's accounts. The SEC's already investigating the forged filings. He'll be lucky to keep his freedom. I didn't respond right away. The word freedom carried too many meanings now. When I stepped into the lobby, employees stood scattered in small clusters, pretending to be busy, but clearly watching. Janet approached first. "Welcome home," she said softly. I smiled. Home is a strong word. But thank you. In my absence, she had kept the company breathing. She handed me a folder, an overview of operations' current projects, and the financial status after Andrew's reckless restructuring. He tried to expand into crypto robotics, she said. Lost nearly $1 million in 6 weeks. I chuckled under my breath. He always wanted shortcuts. Even when he was 10, he'd glue the puzzle pieces instead of finding where they fit. The staff around us laughed nervously. It was the kind of laugh that said, "We're glad you're back, but we're not sure how to act yet." I looked around at the faces that had built this empire with me, people who had endured the chaos my own blood had caused. They didn't need speeches. They needed stability. By noon, my office was restored exactly as I'd left it. The leather chair, the vintage drafting tools, the framed photo of Clara and me on our first trade show floor in 1988. Her eyes seemed to watch me, even now, approving but cautious. I pressed the intercom. "Janet, get me PR. We have work to do." Within hours, the statement hit every major outlet. Whitmore Automation restores founder to leadership launches Senior Innovation Fund. The accompanying photo showed me shaking hands with the new generation of engineers' gray hair beside bright ambition. I wanted them to see that age wasn't a weakness. It was proof. That evening, the headlines multiplied. Father outsmarts son in corporate coup. Silicon Valley's lesson in loyalty. Elder Justice Tech Edition. My inbox overflowed with messages, thousands of them. Retired executives thanking me for speaking up. Young founders asking for mentorship. Even journalists wanting to adapt my story into a book. But the message I didn't open came from Andrew. Subject line, "I'm sorry." I hovered over it for a long time before closing the laptop. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't a transaction. It wasn't something you granted because someone asked. It was something you earned by silence, by absence, by change. And he wasn't ready for any of those. The next day, Martin and I met at the rooftop terrace overlooking the bay. I handed him a check. He blinked. "Robert, this is a lot of zeros. It's the seed money for the Whitmore Resilience Fund. We'll help entrepreneurs over 60 rebuild after financial exploitation, especially by their own families." He raised his glass. "That's poetic justice." "No," I said. "It's balance." The wind carried the scent of salt water and renewal. A week later, the company hosted a press conference in the atrium. Cameras flashed, microphones bristled. I stepped up to the podium and spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Innovation built this company, but integrity kept it alive. And when both were stolen, truth brought them home. We're not just building machines here. We're building second chances. Applause filled the space, loud and real. As I looked over the sea of faces, I saw something that had been missing for a long time: belief. After the crowd dispersed, I returned to my office and stood by the window. The city stretched before me, golden in the late afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, my son was learning what silence feels like when the world stops believing your lies. The phone buzzed a call from the governor's office. They wanted me to speak at a state symposium on elder rights in business. I smiled, turning the phone face down. For once, I didn't need a stage. The victory was already complete. I looked up at Clara's photo on the shelf. "You see love," I murmured. Faith didn't save me. It guided me through the fire until I remembered who I was. The next morning, I signed the final document transferring operational control to Janet. She'd earned it. The company didn't need another patriarch. It needed a future. When I left the building, the employees clapped quietly, not out of obligation, but respect. Outside, the bay wind lifted my coat like a sail. The world smelled clean again. 6 months after the boardroom showdown, I left San Francisco behind. Not in defeat, in completion. The city looked smaller from 30,000 feet, just a grid of light and memory fading beneath the clouds. For decades, my life had been made of deadlines and design blueprints. Now, for the first time, there was no schedule, no meetings, no one waiting to take, to demand, to justify. Only the quiet hum of the jet and the steady pulse of a new beginning. When I stepped out of the arrivals gate at Nice Côte d'Azur Airport, the air was different, warmer, perfumed with salt and lemon trees. A driver held a sign with my name, Mr. Whitmore. He guided me to a silver Aston Martin DB11, its engine whispering like an invitation. The car wound along the French Riviera toward Monaco, sunlight scattering over the Mediterranean. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from anything. I was driving toward myself. The villa I rented sat high above the harbor, stone terraces, blue shutters, a balcony wide enough for the sea breeze to have its own conversation. The real estate agent called it modest by Monaco standards. To me, it was heaven. Each morning began the same way: a cup of espresso, a notebook, and the sound of the city waking below. Yachts glided in and out like white ghosts, bells rang from the cathedral, and I wrote not about betrayal, but about rebirth. The book was called Blueprint for Dignity. Half memoir, half instruction manual for anyone who'd lost themselves trying to save people who didn't deserve it. I wrote, dignity isn't stolen in one act of betrayal. It erodes one small compromise at a time until you forget what self-respect feels like. And later, forgiveness without boundaries is surrender. I forgave my son by refusing to let his choices define my peace. Every sentence I wrote felt like rebuilding a house I should have never left. At noon, I'd walk the marina, camera in hand. Photography had become my new discipline, framing light instead of blueprints. The locals began to recognize me, Monsieur Robert, the quiet American, with kind eyes and expensive taste in cars. I was 73, but I felt 30 again. There's something about freedom that rewires your heartbeat. In the evenings, I'd visit a small cafe overlooking the sea, Café Amélie. Same table, same waiter, same ritual: a glass of red, a slice of dark chocolate, a page of notes. That's where I met Isabella Moretti, an Italian art historian with laughter that sounded like wind through old church bells. We spoke in fragments, my English, her Italian, both filtered through the universal language of survivors. She'd lost her husband to illness. I'd lost my family to greed. but in that shared absence we found presence. "Do you miss home?" she asked one evening. "I used to think home was a place," I said. "Now I think it's a feeling, and I'm beginning to feel it again." She smiled, touched her glass to mine. "Then maybe you're already home, Signore Whitmore." News from America trickled in from time to time, the foundation growing interviews, erring people calling me a symbol of late-life reinvention. But I never gave another speech. Let the story live where it began, with people who needed it more than I did. One afternoon I received a letter from Janet. She'd attached a photo of the new Whitmore Resilience Center ribbon-cutting ceremony. A plaque on the wall read, "Dedicated to those who rebuild after betrayal." I stared at it for a long time, the sea glimmering behind me. Then I whispered, "That'll do, Clara." The next morning I stood on my terrace watching the sunrise ignite the horizon. The same hands that once signed million-dollar deals now held a paintbrush. My new project, a watercolor of the harbor, soft hues, imperfect lines, but undeniably alive. Each stroke felt like a conversation between who I was and who I'd finally become. For decades, I'd believed my legacy would be measured in patents and profits. Now I knew the truth. Legacy is peace. It's waking up with nothing to prove and everything to enjoy. That evening, Isabella and I drove along the coast, the Aston Martin's headlights carving silver trails into the dark. Music played softly, Sinatra, of course. She looked over, smiling. "You seem lighter." "I am," I said. "Because for once, I'm not building for anyone else. I'm just living." The wind carried her laughter out the window, merging with the sound of waves. For the first time in my 73 years, I realized this was what survival felt like, not bitterness, but beauty. Sunday mornings in Monaco had a kind of stillness you couldn't buy. The harbor below shimmered like liquid glass, and the bells from St. Nicholas Cathedral drifted down the hill soft as memory. I walked there often, not because I'd become a churchgoer, but because I liked the quiet. There's something about stone built to last centuries. It makes your own scars feel small. Inside, light filtered through stained glass, painting the pews in blue and gold. I sat in the back row, hands folded around Clara's cross. For a long time, I didn't say anything. Then finally, I whispered, "Thank you for not saving me sooner." The fire made me stronger than the rescue ever could. Faith had found me again, not in sermons or verses, but in stillness. In the understanding that divine timing isn't about miracles arriving on cue. It's about pain leaving when you've learned what it came to teach. I thought about everything that had led me here, the surgery, the forged signature, the betrayal, the humiliation. Every step that had burned me was also a step that refined me. And for the first time, I didn't hate any of it. Not even him. I forgave Andrew silently, privately, without announcement. Not to free him, but to free myself from carrying his mistakes any longer. Outside, the sky was the color of silver. I walked back down the hill toward the marina, the smell of espresso and salt in the air. Tourists took pictures. Locals waved. Some recognized me from the articles that had made their way across Europe, the American founder who reclaimed his life. But the story had grown beyond me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proof that it's never too late to choose dignity over duty, peace over guilt, truth over silence. I stopped at Café Amélie, my usual table facing the sea. Isabella was already there, sketchbook open, hair caught in the sunlight. She smiled when she saw me. "Buongiorno, Signore Whitmore." "Just Robert," I corrected. "Titles belong to the past." She laughed softly. "Then what does the future belong to?" "To anyone brave enough to start over," I said. That afternoon, I finished the last chapter of my book. It ended not with bitterness, but with clarity. If you spend your whole life building for others, one day, you'll wake up and realize you've left no room for yourself. But if you build from integrity, you never lose anything worth keeping. My name was stolen, but my soul wasn't. And that's the blueprint worth following. I sent the final manuscript to my editor in New York. Within minutes, a reply came back. "It's perfect. This isn't a memoir. It's a map for anyone who needs to find themselves again." That evening, I stood on my balcony watching the sunset. The sky bled into the water, orange melting into gold. Down below, Isabella's laughter drifted up from the street, blending with the music from a nearby cafe. I rested my hands on the rail and whispered, "Clara, I kept my promise." I didn't let bitterness win. The sea breeze carried the scent of lavender and salt. Somewhere in that horizon, I felt her peace answering mine. When night came, I opened my laptop one last time, not to check markets or emails, but to upload a new post on the Whitmore Foundation site. To every parent, grandparent, and soul who's ever been betrayed, remember this. You are not defined by the hands that failed to lift you, but by the strength you found when you stood alone. I hit publish. The screen glowed in the dark room like a small, steady light. And in that glow, I felt something larger than victory. I felt redemption. The next morning, Isabella and I drove east along the coast, the world unfolding in color, sky, sea, and freedom. As the cliffs gave way to horizon, she glanced at me and said, "You seem happy, Robert." "Really happy," I smiled. "Because I finally am. I stopped surviving other people's expectations and started living God's design. The sunlight turned the water into liquid fire. I pressed a hand over the cross beneath my shirt, feeling its warmth against my skin. For the first time in 74 years, my faith wasn't in a person or a company or even a legacy. It was in the quiet certainty that everything had happened exactly as it was meant to. And if you're listening to this wherever you are, remember you can start again at 70, at 80, at 90. The moment you choose truth over fear, your life begins again. If this story moved, you subscribe to Brian's Stories, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments, what would freedom look like for you? Because sometimes the most powerful comeback is simply refusing to be broken.